Certainly more of an atmospheric intro than what we've been usually going with, but hello and welcome to State of Play. Sorry, it's been a day. There's my mic. Hello and welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News. I'm your host for this solo episode today, and if you've just accidentally stumbled onto the alternative political media part of the internet, my name is Greg Stoker, a former U.S. Army Ranger turned anti-war activist, journalist, and geopolitical analyst. And some people find my editorial opinions and analysis challenging, especially from a veteran's perspective. Not the biggest fan of U.S. foreign policy, as we'll see over the next hour. So we're just glad you're here. And now that this iteration of the Iran-Israel 12-day war, which accomplished nothing, at least from a Western hegemonic perspective, which we'll discuss later, has concluded, the White House has signaled a desire to resume the darkly quixotic quest for a ceasefire in Gaza, bearing in mind that while the ceasefire in Gaza was in effect this past January for a little bit, the IDF violated it roughly 250 times, and it has been quite the bad week for Israeli propaganda, hasn't it? You know, you had the Glastonbury music festival where you had Bob Vyland, a rap punk duo, come out with this spicy chant.
Death to the IDF! Death, 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 death to the IDF! Hell yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be, will be, inshallah, it will be free.
Yeah, so that sent Hezbollah into a tailspin. For the record, I don't endorse this chant or message. As we all know, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, is more properly referred to as the IOF, the Illegal Occupation Force. At any rate, needless to say, the U.S. government has revoked their visas for their upcoming U.S. tour, citing they don't accept foreigners who glorify hatred and violence. But it's totally fine for Zionist artists like David Draymond of Disturbed to do a photo op signing artillery shells that were lobbed into Gaza, or for a genocidal maniac like Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir to visit D.C. and New York. And it's totally fine for Benjamin Netanyahu, who's being investigated under charges of war crimes by the International Criminal Court. He's supposed to come to Washington, D.C. next week or sometime this coming month. So that's all fine. But the hypocrisy of the moral West is heightening in its contradictions. Last Friday, a harrowing expose, you may have seen this one, y'all, by the liberal Zionist outlet Haaretz, asserted that IDF officers and soldiers told Haaretz that they were ordered to fire at unarmed crowds near food distribution sites in Gaza, even when no threat was present. Obviously, we know this was happening, but the fact that a reliable outlet like Haaretz is finally reporting it is significant. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed, prompting the military prosecution to call for a review into possible war crimes. Netanyahu and Foreign Minister Israel Katz Defense Minister Israel Katz reject the claims, calling them blood libels. All right. And Hezbollah has been in a tailspin. They've even sent in Richard Kemp, former British Army infantry commander and head of the UK's Friends of the Association for the Well-Being of Israel's Soldiers, UK AWIS, Association for the Well-Being of Israel's Soldiers. It's the UK branch of AWIS, an Israeli organization managed by the Israel Defense Forces and headed by General Yoram Yair. Anyways, they sent this paid propagandist, Richard Kemp, who we're going to see in a second, down to the aid distribution centers in Gaza where the massacres happened. And he released the most embarrassing propaganda yet. Well, who can tell anymore? But this one, they didn't even edit out the gun sounds. And I'm going to play this as everyone keeps filtering into the live.
Distribution centers inside Gaza. You will have heard a lot of propaganda about violent attacks in and around the GHF sites here. It's all lies generated by Hamas.
Okay. First of all, the GHF is Gaza Health Humanitarian Foundation. founded by a former Marine sniper. I've talked to guys who applied within the contracting world to GHF. They have no prior experience in humanitarian logistics, and they're all generally ex-special ops guys. But anyways, keep going, Richard Kemp.
In order to discredit the GHF, the Hamas hate the GHF because the GHF delivers aid directly into the hands of the Gazan people without being seized by Hamas and sold at a profit. Very many of the people behind me here have told me it's the first time they've ever received free aid. So don't believe the propaganda that's been churned out by Hamas and amplified by too much of the international and national media.
Whoops, what was that?
International and national media.
All right. Well, first of all, Hamas isn't stealing the aid. We all know who is, according to Israel's own reporting in Hebrew media. It's the Abu Shabab gang, like a bunch of ISIS-affiliated Bedouin goons running around, stealing aid, beating up aid workers, killing people. And Hamas actually had to, a couple weeks ago, stage an ambush and kill a number of these Abu Shabab ISIS-related goon squads that the Israeli intelligence is funding. Because they had to make a statement. They had to show that they weren't the ones doing it. Of course, you know, the Israel pays these kind of gangs to do this and then blame it on Hamas. So, of course, it's all part of their propaganda engine, which, again, took a massive, massive hit. So that is what's actually going on with these what is actually going on with these incredibly complex and dynamic Gaza developments and what's happening in the wider region. Well, we're going to talk about it all this episode, but let's first check in with a couple minutes of liberal media reporting. It's actually not horrible, which is significant.
In Gaza, again proved lethal. The Hamas-run health ministry says Israeli strikes killed at least 80.
Still have to add in that Hamas-run agency. It's an editorial note. It's just policy at this newsroom.
Palestinians and wounded 400 others. CBS's Deborah Pata reports tonight from Jerusalem.
Good evening, Jurika. There is renewed hope that the ceasefire in Iran could lead to one in Gaza. But even as President Trump indicated there could be a truce within the
Nope. We're going to be talking about this all episode. That's a hard nope, it can't.
Next week, Israeli forces launched a series of strikes overnight on Gaza City.
A ceasefire may be inching closer, but Gaza City was trapped in a pit of despair following overnight Israeli airstrikes, which blasted this massive crater right in the middle of a makeshift camp sheltering displaced Palestinians. Rescue workers dug frantically, retrieving at least 5 tents as they searched for the people who had been living in them. It was mostly the limp bodies of children pulled from the rubble. 12 people died, 10 between the ages of 1 and 11.
Of course, the Israeli Defense Force has put out a statement saying that they were targeting a senior Hamas official who they apparently killed. Of course, they will not release any details because, of course, they weren't targeting that.
According to eyewitnesses, in a second strike nearby, there were desperate attempts to revive those who'd been trapped. Many died of suffocation.
Again, this is the first time we're actually seeing this kind of reporting happen immediately on a large CBS newsroom. So, of course, 2 years too late, almost 2 years too late, but at least it's finally happening now.
When morning came, everyone lent a hand trying to save what they could. Here in Gaza, we are buried twice, said Zayed Jaber, first while alive, and then when we are dead. His children are still in hospital in a critical condition. At the morgue, families bent over with grief, prepared to bury their dead. Among them, tiny bodies wrapped in shrouds. This distraught father had kept his children safe for nearly 2 years of war. Now this. Palestinians who were living here have nowhere else to go after being repeatedly displaced. It's enough, said Naveen Al-Kluli. Please stop the war. Feel our pain. Let the children live.
Gaza's health ministry says more than 60 people died in the strikes, Jerika. And the IDF says they were targeting a senior Hamas leader who was also killed.
Deborah Patta, thank you.
That's the general humanitarian situation right now. Also, there's been other developments over the weekend, like Israel was putting opioids in flour and other drugs in the flour, so that when people would be exposed to that and other chemicals when they went to bake bread, because they have to let aid in now. They have to pretend to let aid in now. So I guess just pump it full of chemicals and other harmful material, drugs, get the kids hooked on like opioids while they're young. But yeah, anything that's completely sadistic, they've cornered the market on that. So these Israeli airstrikes and other small arms fire have killed at least 60 people across Gaza a day after Trump called to make a deal in Gaza, get the hostages back. He posted it like late Sunday morning, early Sunday morning on Truth Social. So these aerial combat operations are just all too familiar after nearly 2 years of unmitigated violence. And according to Reuters, Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer is traveling to Washington for talks on Iran and Gaza, which would account for the heightened bombing campaign over the weekend, as Israel's fundamental military Dahiya Doctrine, the collective punishment of civilians in order to assert diplomatic pressure, continues unabated. So Ron Dermer is expected to hold meetings with Trump administration officials on Tuesday, tomorrow at time of this recording, according to a report by Reuters, the same one. Alongside the Gaza ceasefire discussions, Dermer also plans to discuss the possibility of Netanyahu visiting Washington, D.C. in the coming weeks, most likely to shore up political support now that his long-standing corruption trial has been postponed due to continuity and security issues regarding the Gaza negotiations and the simmering conflict with Iran. The prospect that anything can be achieved on these matters is remote as daily fighting continues across the enclave. And despite Israel's degrading image on the world stage, the fundamental diplomatic issues remain. A Hamas official said that progress depends on Israel changing its long-standing position that the Israeli military remain in Gaza after the end of the war, and that Hamas disband and dismantle. Hamas, of course, refuses to lay down arms. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said that Israel has agreed to a U.S. proposed 60-day ceasefire and hostage deal and put the onus on Hamas. He told reporters, quote, Israel is serious in its will to reach a hostage deal and a ceasefire in Gaza, unquote. The U.S. 60-day ceasefire proposal is being exhumed out of the grave, put back on the table. Again, it's a non-starter since Hamas won't accept a 60-day ceasefire if the fighting's just going to continue after 2 months. In which case, they know that Israel's going to be violating the ceasefire constantly. The last ceasefire, again, I said, over 250 ceasefire violations from the Israeli side happened under the last ceasefire. So what, they're going to just accept 60 days of constant bombardment with them not being able to attack the Israeli Defense Forces? And then just for it to end in 60 days after all the hostages are recovered? This whole thing, obviously you're smart. Everyone here is media literate, so you're picking up what's being put down. So while prominent politicians, So more, basically, guys, this is just smoke and mirrors to extend further political cover to the Netanyahu government as it continues with its plan to devastate the enclave to the point where Gazans will elect voluntary migration. So basically, the voluntary migration piece, I just want to talk about this. There's nowhere for them to go. The U.S. isn't going to take them. Europe's not going to take them. The MENA countries can't take them. So basically, they're going for death. Mass death, while the final solution to the Gaza problem. And while prominent politicians such as Austrian Foreign Minister Bete Meinl Reisinger, sorry, my grandmother tried to teach me German, but I was no. apologies, but yes, we'll just say the Austrian foreign minister declared that the, quote, suffering of civilians is increasingly burdening Israel's relationships with Europe. A ceasefire must be agreed upon, unquote. No tangible political pressure, and this is the through line when we get to talking about this, has been put upon the rogue state to end the killing. One gleam of hope for the Palestinians comes from Israel's military failure in its engagement with Iran over the 12-day war. Its regional military impunity was checked, and is difficult to overstate how damaging this was to Israel's deterrence capacity, which the state relies on as a pillar of its security posture. And of course, Israel's position is deceptively weak. Despite the moderately successful U.S. diplomatic efforts to push for pan-Arab normalization with the Zionist state, still deceptively weak position. And in this episode of State of Play here on Mint Press News, we're going to really break down the latest escalation, explore the political theater behind the ceasefire negotiations, and expose how Israel's controversial Dahiya Doctrine, collective punishment as deterrence, is still being used with impunity. This is all very calculated. We'll also discuss the postponed Netanyahu corruption trial, which Trump blasted off about this weekend, and its implications, the hollow prospects for a U.S. brokered 60-day ceasefire, why Hamas refuses to disarm, and what's at stake, and of course, the lasting impact of Israel's failed confrontation with Iran. First, let's look at this watershed Haaretz expose from last Friday and what it reveals about the Trump administration's real motivations here. Okay. First of all, this was kind of crazy. We all know this was happening, but every time Haaretz reports something that we know happened, like Apache attack helicopters were used to fire on civilians at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th, they always get decried across the Israeli media landscape for being traitors, for being like leftists, and for being anti-patriotic. But again, Haaretz is the best liberal Zionist reporting you're going to get. So if they're saying it, we can definitely believe that they have high confidence that this is actually going on. So Israeli soldiers in Gaza told Haaretz that the army has deliberately fired at Palestinians near aid distribution sites over the past month. Conversations with soldiers reveal that commanders ordered troops to shoot at crowds, to drive them away or disperse them, even though it was clear they posed no threat. One soldier described the situation as a total breakdown of the Israeli Defense Forces' ethical codes in Gaza. The fact that they believe they still have ethical codes is wild. So since these aid distribution sites have been set up, over 400 have been wounded, but the exact number of those killed by the IDF remains unclear. So, one second. And, the military advocate general has instructed the IDF general staff's fact-finding assessment mechanism to conduct an investigation. They will conduct an investigation and find that they've done nothing wrong. So yeah, or they'll come up with a couple scapegoats and they won't go to jail. They'll just get relieved of command. Standard cover-up BS. So in the statement released following the publication of this expose 3 days ago, Netanyahu and Israel Katz called it blood libel. Blood libel. So the real thing, and the reason why this kind of matters is that we need to talk about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF. All right. These aid centers began operating in the Strip at the end of May. These are all generally special operations soldiers turned defense contractors who are now at the aid sites. And a lot of their behavior has been really fucked up and problematic. It seems like they're making a game out of this. Certainly the IDF is recreating the Hunger Games, more like the Squid Games, with these aid sites. The Palestinians have to rush in, under fire, get herded in through corrals, many of them shot and killed just to get food. And of course, it's a game. So the circumstances of this foundation, the GHF's establishment and its funding, are murky. It is known to have been set up by Israel in coordination with U.S. evangelicals and private security contractors. Its current CEO is an evangelical leader close to U.S. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and it operates these 4 food distribution centers. 3 in southern Gaza and 1 in the center. There's nothing happening in the north. There's fighting in the north, also in the south, but the 3 sites are not in the 4 sites are not in the north. So these are called rapid distribution centers, and they are staffed by American and Palestinian workers and secured by the IDF from a distance of several hundred meters. So most of the gunfire we're seeing coming in has been Israeli gun teams just shooting a couple hundred meters away at Palestinians going for aid. So, thousands and times tens of thousands of Gazas arrive daily to collect foods from these sites, right? And so, contrary to the foundation's initial promises, the distribution is chaotic. It's a killing field. One soldier said, quote, "Where I was stationed," and this is coming from the Haaretz article, "between 1 and 5 people were killed every day. They're treated like a hostile force. No crowd control measures, no tear gas, just live fire with everything imaginable. Heavy machine guns, grenade launchers, mortars. Then, once the center opens, the shooting stops. They know that they can approach. Our form of communication is gunfire." So, yeah, and basically a lot of people think that they've been doing this because Gaza doesn't interest anyone anymore, said a reservist. It's become a place with its own set of rules. The loss of human life means nothing. It's not even an unfortunate accident like they used to say. So what all is going to come from this expose? Of course, nothing. In terms of policy, absolutely nothing will change. And we know that. We know how this we know how this works at this point. But what's interesting and what we should take away from this is, let's pull up this and let's show you let's do a Google search. So we can interpret, Trump's real policy goals by who he's supporting, why the Gaza Health Foundation is there in the first place. So Gaza, I keep calling it the Health Foundation, Humanitarian Foundation. I guess it's CEO now. The founder resigned. The Marine sniper who founded it resigned, and it's taken over by Johnny Moore Jr., American evangelical leader and businessman. He has previously praised Donald Trump's proposal to take over the Gaza Strip, stating the USA will take full responsibility for the future of Gaza, giving everyone hope and a future. And so basically the New York Times did a biopic on this Johnny Moore Jr. guy, and he attended prayer meetings in the White House. He's now the chairman of the Gaza Aid Group. We've talked about how Trump wants to privatize the Gaza Strip. Obviously, his son-in-law has massive connections with Gulf real estate interests, that being Jared Kushner, and they want to turn Gaza into the new Dubai, the new Singapore, whatever, city strikes their fancy at the time. So what we've said from the beginning, I've said this months ago in January when the story first broke, that they were using UG Solutions and SRS guys to run security, private American contractors to run security at these security checkpoints. They were doing this as a pilot, a test program to see if they could send U.S. contractors in there without getting them killed by Hamas. But of course, Hamas and other resistance factions within the Strip would not target these guys, right? Because it would risk further bringing American involvement directly into the Strip, which they don't want. So now they're using these aid distribution sites through GHF as a pilot program to expand privatized security and humanitarian logistical contracting and work throughout the entirety of the Gaza Strip. Because, guys, this is a big business. Defense contracting was like one of the biggest money laundering schemes during the global war on terror. Halliburton, it was a construction company, but they're also doing defense contracting. Dynacor, like all of these institutions, all of these defense contracting companies are subsidized by the government. They take taxpayer money out of the public sector into the private, and they make the same people that want to bring in and develop the Gaza Strip. They sit on the boards of these defense contractors as well. So everyone within this small community of interventionist capitalists is making a lot of money. So yes, Johnny Moore, again, he's an evangelical Christian Zionist. Trump elected or appointed Mike Huckabee, arch evangelical Christian Zionist, to Israel. So like these evangelicals, these Zionist evangelicals, they don't want a ceasefire in Gaza. They want the messianic vision of a greater Israel to be realized. And of course, they're all informing policy. So when Trump talks about a ceasefire, I'm like, cool, dude, but all the people you appoint are diametrically opposed to having a ceasefire and a two-state solution. And yeah, so okay, cool. The guy who's now running the U.S. security forces in Gaza is a guy who got picked up because of his fervor at White House prayer meetings. Yeah, so look, we've seen this ceasefire talk before. We're not really placing much stock in it, but the postponed Netanyahu corruption trial and its implications. Let's move on to that. So, because that's all part of the ceasefire deal. Like, here we go. Let me think. I think I had this queued up from Fox Business reporting or Inside Fox News reporting from earlier today.
I'm Austin Westfall, getting some breaking news in. This is from Axios's Barak Ravid. He says President Trump is continuing to press for canceling Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial and hints that he could suspend military aid to Israel if the trial continues. This is an unprecedented threat, Ravid says, in the U.S.-Israeli relationship.
This is incredibly important because it telegraphs everything that it underpins everything that's not said publicly about the Trump-Netanyahu relationship. So let's get this straight, folks. Trump said he will directly intervene in Israeli internal politics by withholding military aid, not because they're doing a genocide, but because they're prosecuting Benjamin Netanyahu. So, cool. Just saying. Anyone who says that we can't control Israel, we can. We just did it in order to cancel or postpone Benjamin Netanyahu's freaking corruption trial. And let's go to a Guardian article published today and look at it briefly. So, Israel court's decision to cancel this week's hearing in the long-running trial came after Donald Trump said the case should be thrown out. Look, guys, this is just demonstrating he is lockstep with Benjamin Netanyahu on this, on Iran, on Gaza, on everything throughout the Middle East. He is lockstep with Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants us in war with Iran. Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire in Gaza. Ergo, it's reasonable to assume that Trump's ultimate decision-making policies will be to protect Netanyahu. Why he does that, I think y'all have some theories. Performative effect is he's going to protect Netanyahu, and what Netanyahu wants: more confrontation with Iran, development of Gaza, and the realization of a greater Israel that starts and begins with the normalization of the Arab world, all the governments with Israel, both politically, commercially, and diplomatically. Anyways, an Israeli court has canceled this week's hearing and, quote, following the explanations given, we partially accept the request and cancel at this stage Mr. Netanyahu's hearing scheduled for the week, the Jerusalem District Court said in its ruling, published online by Netanyahu's Likud party. The ruling said that the new reasons provided by Netanyahu, the head of Israel's spy agency, the Mossad, and military intelligence chief, justified canceling the hearings. It comes after Donald Trump last week called for the case to be thrown out. The social media post said the case against him was a witch hunt, should be canceled immediately, or a pardon given to a great hero. And of course, this all stems from Netanyahu, who was indicted in 2019 of charges of bribery, fraud, breach of trust, all which he denies, of course. And he has cast the trial against him as an orchestrated left-wing witch hunt meant to topple a democratically elected right-wing leader. All right. So real quick, in terms of the Israeli political landscape, there is no left-wing movement. There, just like in America, there is no left-wing movement. There are liberal Zionists who still generally support the actions taken. They just don't like the far-right party. But they're all lockstep about the war, generally. One of the big major contentions between what they would call the political left and the far-right Likud and associated coalitions within in the Knesset is the hostage issue. But in terms of leveling Gaza, But anyways, in one of the cases, he and his wife, Sarah, accused of accepting more than $2,600,000 worth of luxury goods, such as cigars, jewelry, and champagne from billionaires in exchange for political favors. So fascism, amazing. So basically, Trump said Netanyahu was right now negotiating a deal with Hamas, though neither leader has provided details as of yet, and officials from both sides have voiced skepticism over prospects for a ceasefire soon. There's not going to be a friggin' ceasefire soon. On Friday, the Republican president told reporters he believed the ceasefire was close. Yeah, he said on Friday, it's going to be close. We think it's going to happen by the end of the week. No, it's not. It's just not. The hollow prospects for a U.S. brokered 60-day ceasefire. Guys, this is U.S. policy when it comes to Israel. Give them political cover. Keep stringing along the narrative. Give them another month, another week of ethnic cleansing, bro. Just one more week, bro. We're good. And so what we try to do, and we saw this with Iran, we strung out these nuclear talks, almost went into the 6th round before Israel struck over the weekend, a couple weeks ago. And why did the U.S. do that? You know, President Trump came out saying he had prior warning. He knew that Israel was going to attack, but they strung out the negotiation process to lull the Iranian diplomatic corps and military into a false sense of security, because no one expected the talks to proceed that far. And of course, it was a diplomatic ploy to further a military objective. And of course, Trump authorized it and he got on board. A lot of people I've talked to in Washington, D.C., and I do agree with this analysis, think that it has more to do with, like, he was talked into it by people who are like, the Israelis can cut the head off the snake. They can kill the Ayatollah. They can kill all these military leaders within the IRGC. They can kill the head of the Iranian nuclear program and all its physicists and destroy it. And after that happens, after Khomeini is taken out, regime collapse or regime change operations can begin. And Israel promised that. The U.S. neocon establishment within the White House most likely promised that as well. Completely delusional. But this foreign policy is determined by ideology and not rational thinking. And so he went ahead with it. Also, he saw the strikes on Tehran and was like, you know what? That looks cool. We're going to do that. And so he struck the Iranian nuclear facilities. But in terms of like the ceasefire itself, let's hear from President Trump.
How close are you and your administration to a deal in terms of Gaza ceasefire right now?
Often asked, and I think it's close. I just spoke with some of the people involved. It's a terrible situation that's going Gaza. He's asking about, and we think within the next week we're going to get a ceasefire. And we're supplying, as you know, a lot of money and a lot of food to that area because we have to. I mean, you have to. We're in theory not involved in it, but we're involved because people are dying. And I look at those crowds of people that have no food, no anything, and, you know, we're the ones that are getting it there. Some of it's being taken by some bad people, you know, if you give it and you give it out, and they're supposed to be taking care of the people, and they end up stealing the food and selling it. But we have a pretty good system now, but so we're helping with that. You see the lines of people that just get one meal, essentially. A lot of publicity because of the level of brutality, right? It was nobody's ever seen anything like it. And to be involved in that, I mean, I consider this the most important of my conferences today. We just had a great Supreme Court victory today, and everybody would say that was big, but, you know, we're talking about saving thousands and probably millions of lives here. This is more important than anything. So it's great, but we're working on Gaza, trying to get it taken care of.
Yeah, that means absolutely nothing. Again, because who in their right mind at this point, after watching the deception games played with the Iranian nuclear deal, to play cover for a nuclear, a decapitation strike against Iranian leadership, after we did the same thing to Nasrallah, right? Because during the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah, U.S. envoy to Lebanon at that time, I think that was still, what was his name? He was that ex-IDF soldier. There's too many names for me to keep track of. But yes, the U.S. was giving political cover, making assurances to Nasrallah, to Hezbollah, like trying to facilitate it. And it was all just to buy time in order for Israel to ascertain Nasrallah's location and assassinate him. This is how they do it. This is the U.S.'s role in the current state of affairs with regards to Israel and our engagement in the Middle East. And people are like, Israel's waving the tail of the dog. No, this is, or sorry, the tail is wagging the dog. But no, I always say this because I don't like the whole narrative about how U.S. controls U.S. foreign policy. It exerts an undue influence on U.S. foreign policy. But at the end of the day, and if you look at these diplomatic moves and how the U.S. is doing it, it's clear that Israel is just an extension of the U.S. empire to conduct adventurous wars and destabilization operations to reshape the region into vassal states that will allow Western capitalists to exploit their people and resources. So the United States' role is to let its attack dog, Israel, disrupt Iran, which is a challenge to Western hegemony within the region, to clamp down on the axis of resistance, to destabilize Syria for extraction and exploitative diplomatic purposes, to normalize with the Gulf states and intelligence services, overthrow Iran, isolate China, Russia. Like, this is all part of a global strategy, right? And our role as the U.S. empire is to provide political cover so our attack dog can do it. And brings us to the next point. That is what's happening with the ceasefire. It's just to buy more time so Israel can do what it was already going to do. And even though the 12-day war with Iran is over, it was just the first iteration of what was happening. They had to end it, and they're preparing for round 2. This is not over by any stretch of the imagination. So let's talk about this from the perspective of a right-wing thought leader, Steve Bannon, who basically was the intellectual force behind the America First movement. Anyways, he has a lot of contacts within the administration. He sees Donald Trump as a vehicle to enact political change that he wants to see in the United States. But Steve Bannon, the political strategist and former advisor to Donald Trump, says the Israeli regime agreed to a ceasefire with Iran to save itself as the aggression it launched exceeded its capabilities. In remarks published last Wednesday on a show, Bannon's War Room, I can't listen to the guy speak, so I'm just going off this article that recaps it. He said that the U.S. brokered ceasefire with the regime unilaterally accepted was not as much to save Israel. The hidden story here, he says, they bit off way more than they could chew. They were played out as this far, he said, as Iran dealt heavy blows to Israel. He particularly referred to the final night of Iran's retaliatory military operation, True Promise 3, when a barrage of new generation missiles was launched at the occupied territories, resulting in many casualties and widespread destruction. So, basically, he asserted that the Trump brokered the ceasefire with Iran with the help of Qatar, probably Oman, as well as the Israeli regime was running out of defensive ammunition. So, that's what we're doing. What we're waiting for as we give diplomatic cover to Israel is they are trying to restock their defensive interceptors before another iteration of a war with Iran has started. So here's the problem. How soon will this happen? How soon will they be in a position to fight Iran again? It's based off of military logistical capacity. Look at this, guys. The real question is, who can build missiles faster? Is it Israel, which in conjunction with Raytheon, the American component of the Iron Dome system that creates the Tamir interceptor rockets, is low, has a supply chain chokehold, which constrains missile output. So we don't even have enough for ourselves within the region. Israel definitely doesn't. So who can make the missiles faster? Can Iran make the ballistic missiles faster, or can Israel replenish its stockpiles faster? So basically, there are massive constraints within the Israel and U.S. military industrial base that kind of makes it unlikely. It seems like Iran does have the upper hand because, first of all, they have a completely different supply chain than ours. And a lot of it is done in their own country. It's native, it's indigenous to the Israeli military, the Iranian military industrial complex. We're having to outsource to different countries for ours. It's causing huge supply chain issues. We can't get enough rocket motors for ourselves, not to mention for the Iron Dome. So yeah, this came out last week, and I was reading this. It was on Defense News. This is Raytheon spokesperson saying all this. So yeah, basically, I think the war with Iran, or the conflict with Iran, will hinge, and what form it takes, when the next iteration will happen, will hinge upon us fixing our industrial base capacities for military conflict, because it's a distance conflict. And the two things that we pay attention to are Iran's ballistic missiles and our interceptors. Now, of course, why is that important? It's because the Israelis, and not like the bombs that Israel has the capacity to drop on Tehran. There are air operations flying out of Israel, flying into Iranian airspace, dropping munitions on Tehran or Isfahan or Natanz or wherever, flying back, getting refueled by U.S. Stratotankers over Syrian airspace, and then landing F-35 fighter jets back at Netanyahu Air Force Base in Israel is way more expensive and way less efficient than Iran just shooting ballistic missiles, cheaper ballistic missiles across the Iraqi and Jordanian airspace. So it's really just not cost effective for the United States, and since we're subsidizing 70% of Israeli military operations, yeah, it's basically just us. And again, how are they going to get out of this? And when I say they're deceptively weak, like, Israel's the size of New Jersey. It doesn't have a lot of strategic depth. They can't just produce these things and make them, materialize without the industrial base or capacity. So they're out of rocket motors. And in the meantime, they signed the ceasefire deal because they had to, and because they will use that momentum to continue to bomb Lebanon, which they're doing, to occupy Syria and expand their occupation of Syria, which they're doing, and to level Gaza and annex the entirety of the West Bank. So that's what we're looking at. And the United States' role in this is to play political cover until Israel restores its interceptor capacity, and while it levels Gaza and privatizes all of the Gaza Strip. So we're just going to string this along, talking about a ceasefire, which will never happen as the circumstances remain right now. And in the meantime, there's going to ambush warfare where, Hamas or other resistance group literally are just taking out entire tank crews, will continue. Yeah, I think that's kind of like where we're situated right now. And what does this mean for the wider region? Well, we all know that behind this, we want a couple things. Me speaking from the Imperial perspective. A lot of people within the defense establishment were not happy that we only did one airstrike. I know you guys are tracking that a controlled leak was given to CNN last week, talking about how the airstrikes, the U.S. B-2 bomber strikes on the facility, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites were not effective. We set their program back by a couple months, like 6 months, not years. We're not, the enriched uranium is not accounted for. Israel, we anticipate Iran withdrawing from the non-proliferation treaty and leaving the IAEA, the Atomic Energy Watchdog, completely, because the IAEA is filled with spies and gave targeting data for Iranian scientists to the IDF so they could kill them. It's insane. But anyways, the bottom line here would be that there's these leaks were given not because they wanted to embarrass the Trump administration, but because they wanted to humiliate the Trump administration into ramping or doing a second set of strikes. We have every reason to believe that these controlled leaks were not to de-escalate the situation by being like, oh yeah, it didn't work, what can we do, but by wanting to escalate the situation. So it's my personal opinion that these leaks that came in order to push the war forward. Trump seems to be taking a step back because, again, he's not a president of peace. You can't be a U.S. president and be a president of peace, but he does want a normalization between an expansion of the Abraham Accords throughout the region. And Syria is next up on the list. There's been a lot of developments there. Jelani, or Abu al-Shara, whatever you want to call him, has been conceding to Western demands in exchange for sanction relief. He's also opening up different new trade relations with Turkey. They now have a bilateral trade agreement so they can ship things in and out, which wasn't happening during the Syrian civil war. And that opens up trade lanes down the middle corridor from Turkey into the Gulf states. He definitely wants regional stability, and also to turn like Saudi and the UAE and the Gulf states into a bastion of AI super development to rival China, and to bring Saudi Arabia closer, further away from BRICS nations, and have them sit more in the Western aligned sphere. And that's why they're investing so much in AI technology in Saudi Arabia, and they're having conferences, AI conferences in Doha. It's not going to work. They don't have they're starting too late. They can't compete with China, but he definitely does want to see regional peace. And I think from his mind and the minds of the defense establishment, who also want regional peace in the form of mass normalization with Israel, they have to have Iran gone. And of course, Iran falling brings into further geopolitical flashpoints like Taiwan, the isolation of China, Russia, etc. However, this is further complicated, because the freaking Israeli ministers are now saying that once the Iranian nuclear program is dismantled, Pakistan's next, because they're the only other power in the region. They actually have a nuke. They have a nuke, and what they have done over the past month, because their nuclear program was geared against India. Pakistan was. I'm not going to talk about the history of the partition, but it was geared towards India, and that's it. Now, after Libya and this Operation Midnight Hammer strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, in conjunction with Israeli ministers and think tank professors coming out and saying, we need to dismantle Pakistan after we have regime change in Iran, because they're a Muslim country that can deter them within the region. And so now Pakistan has announced that because they don't have a delivery method beyond short-range missiles that would hit anywhere in India, they can't reach Israel. They can't reach the United States. And now the only way to be safe is to ramp up, to proliferate your nuclear program. So they're developing ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile technology, now as a deterrent against U.S. and Israeli aggression. So has this stabilized the region? No. They want chaos that they can control. But as we've seen, the U.S. is never able to control the chaos that it creates. Hey guys, we're gonna have like 10 minutes. If you want to post questions in there, I'll try to find some of those questions in there. But we got like 10 minutes left. So yeah, it really hasn't stabilized anything. But from their line of thinking within the established defense establishment, yes, we want peace and stability throughout the Middle East, but Iran has to go first. It's a capitalist mission, it's a Zionist mission, it's an evangelical mission, and it's a completely ideological neoconservative mission to collapse Iran and reinstall kind of like a bourgeois dictator that's subservient to Western hegemonic interests within Central Asia and West Asia, or complete regime collapse a la Libya and eventually Syria. But in the meantime, they're going to continue their pressure campaign. They might resume nuclear talks again as a part of diplomatic cover and political theater for Israel to get it reestablish its deterrence and to continue its leveling of Gaza. So when do I think someone just asked, okay, let me add that. Yeah, okay. First of all, someone just said, yeah, they'll replace him with the Shah's son, or who would they replace him with? Yeah, Reza Pahlavi. No, I mean, he is the Shah's grandson is a CIA asset. But it's long past the point where the Iranian people would like settle for another bourgeois monarch at this junction. So, okay, getting some questions here. Okay. Ooh, someone brought in the Pakistan Peace Prize. Oh, I don't have a question. Just want to extend my sincere gratitude for my activism. Oh, thank you so much. We'll continue. And anyways, okay. So that's where things stand right now. Just wanted to get on here and talk about the GHF, the Gaza massacres, the Iranian nuclear talks, and Trump, because I want to disabuse everybody of the notion that these ceasefire talks, that these Iranian nuclear talks are in any way made in good faith. They are not. They are political theater meant to continue to drag out this crisis, genocide, and to collapse the Iranian regime. I was on TRT World, what was it, 2 weeks ago? And I told the anchor that, they're looking to assassinate the Ayatollah, both the CIA and Mossad. And he was just like, what? Are you serious? Obviously, a military invasion is non-viable. How else are they going to collapse the regime without like their fascination with decapitation strikes? And then, of course, the next week, Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, came out and said, yeah, we were looking to assassinate the Ayatollah, but we couldn't get to him. So that would be a next level precedent. They assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. They bombed a consulate in Damascus, an Iranian consulate in Damascus. Assassinated Nasrallah, a politically elected leader who was actually a civilian, not a military leader. So would Israel assassinate the head of a state? Of course. And they'd brag about it, because there's nothing that they won't normalize, and they get away with it too. So yeah, they are looking to do that, but just want to do this episode to explain what Trump's position is. It's political theater, and he's going to back Israel no matter what. And you can say it's the Epstein files. Not really. I mean, even without the Epstein files, or whether or not he's in them, I don't really care. Just for the sake of capitalist interest and imperialist interest, this would be happening even if they didn't have blackmail on him or other people within the administration. So, all right, I started some questions. All right. When do you think Netanyahu's trial will resume? It's postponed for a little bit. When it resumes, I mean, the trial will resume. I think it's clear, until all the fighting stops. All the fighting will not stop if Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, who supports him unconditionally, has anything to say about it. So I think the trial is an important thing to talk about, but it's really not going to affect materially what's happening. Of course, it's causing fractions and fractures within the voter base and the citizenry of Israel. But in terms of military action, stopping the genocide, taking a more dove-like approach to Iran, nothing at all. And so that's why I don't think the talks or the trials really materially important to this at all at this juncture. Greg, do you think that Israel and America's focus on decapitation campaigns that tell that they themselves are vulnerable to decapitation attacks, i.e. relying on cults of personality? Not necessarily. I think the U.S. has always been obsessed, and Israeli more so. Military and intelligence apparatus has always been obsessed with its decapitation strike. It doesn't work. Didn't work in Vietnam. Didn't work during the global war on terror. like all these decentralized networks and stuff, they think it will collapse the political identity and the solidarity within these organizations, and they'll all fall to infighting. But this is, they're not new to this freaking rodeo. This isn't their first rodeo. They know that, once their leaders are assassinated, they expect Israel to exploit divisions. And so generally you see a rally around the flag effect. And also they're basically clutching at this decapitation strike doctrine because we can't invade militarily. We can't bomb Iran into destruction. We don't have enough bombs. We don't even have enough bombs to level Gaza. So, I mean, at least not for a while. So what are we going to do? Decapitation strike is the only strategy that we have that we can pitch to people, and it won't work. It just won't work, guys. So, is the U.S. vulnerable to decapitation attacks? Not really. It wouldn't change. Like if Trump got X'd out by some weird, sketchy situation with, a really bad shooter who didn't even qualify for his high school shooting team, happens and he gets taken out like JFK did, the machine of empire will keep rolling right along. We've had presidents assassinated and shot before. Doesn't really, no. Again, because decapitation strikes aren't all that they're cut out to be, whether it's United States government or the Iranian government. And I will say that Israel's modus operandi, the Mossad's modus operandi, because they're Murder Incorporated, is to basically, if they can't collapse the system or the organization, to kill every person and work their way down the hierarchy until they find someone who will capitulate to them and basically give them diplomatic concessions in exchange for not being murdered by the Mossad. So that's kind of what happened with Hezbollah. And some people were kind of surprised that Iran accepted the ceasefire. I'm not, or disappointed, because they're putting a lot of pressure on Israel militarily. But you have to understand, they didn't want this war. They don't want a war. There's a lot of difficult internal politics going on with Iran, and they don't want a war. They want sanctions relief from the United States. There's a lot of other things going on than just collapsing Israel. And of course, they didn't, like Russia, China, Pakistan, all these regional and global players didn't want this to escalate at all. So, yeah. Can you explain why Pakistan just nominated Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize in the context of the recent move to develop ICBM tech to push back to U.S. and Israeli aggression? Yeah, guys, again, this is the main trend of this episode. Sorry, main theme of this episode. It's political theater. All right, yeah. So Pakistan is playing, and of course, there are different ideological factions within the Pakistani intelligence service and political military establishment. But it's political theater. So what? They nominate, Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. So he kind of gets flattered, and Pakistan seems like they're more, open to, the West, when in reality they're developing an escalatory nuclear deterrent. So yeah, okay, they can nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, but what are they actually doing behind the scenes? They're protecting their own interests, just like any other country would, by flattering Trump, which he loves. We all know he wants the Nobel Peace Prize, while also heightening their national security apparatus. So this is how diplomacy works in the brave new world. So anyways, guys, just wanted to get back to Gaza because this is now central to everything that's happening within the region in terms of how this iteration with Iran, in terms of the distance conflict, is done for now. It will ignite again, most likely. The Trump administration will continue to push for pan-Arab normalization with Israel in conjunction with regime change or collapse operations in Persia or within Iran, and he will continue to provide political cover for Trump or for Netanyahu to do what Netanyahu does best, which is to kill, expand, and see a messianic vision of a greater Israel. All right, guys, I hope that we touched on a number of subjects. I hope that was helpful and informative. This concludes our live stream here on Mint Press News. We are actually going back to twice a week with these, Monday and Thursday. Thursdays, I will be having discussions with other journalists at Mint Press News, like Robert N. Lakesh, Alan McLeod, maybe Low Key, if he's ever available, and other guests. So new template is live stream with just me yapping at the camera, and Thursdays is more of a discussion-based thing. So cheers, y'all. Hope to see you Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Do not get caught up in the political theater, because you're more literate than that. Anyways, cheers, y'all, and I will see you Thursday. Have a good night.